Let's return to This Week in America. Here's your host, Rick Bratton.
Welcome back, everybody, coast to coast. This Week in America. Ronald Goodman Nelson's Hydrocarbon Man, Memoirs of a 20th Century Oil Business Executive, is a fascinating and unique memoir. Ronald grew up in central Minnesota on a dairy farm there. He's a petroleum engineer and holds a BS and MS from the University of Minnesota. His career spanned many countries and major oil field production areas, including Libya, the North Sea, and various U.S. oil and natural gas fields. He's previously had articles published in periodicals such as the Petroleum Journal and the Oil and Gas Journal. He invented the tension leg platform, used to exploit deep water oil and gas fields all over the world. He's also pioneered some now common techniques for increasing oil field production by injecting chemicals to extend the life of oil-producing areas and therefore increasing the amount of oil that could be produced from those fields, often by more than 20%. He consulted worldwide for 15 years until his retirement in 2000. Ronald Goodman Nelson, author of Hydrocarbon Man, Memoirs of a 20th Century Oil Business Executive, experienced the age of energy from an oil executive's view, one who has witnessed the trials of an industry fueling our lives. And Ronald joins us on This Week in America. Welcome to the program. I am so looking forward to talking with you. Thank you for joining us.
Well, thank you, Rick. I've been looking forward to it as well, and I really enjoy listening to your program. I get it on my radio all the time.
I appreciate that. Thank you for saying that. And this is going to be such an interesting conversation. Let's start with the beginning. How did you get involved in the hydrocarbon business? I don't want to necessarily say a pioneer, but you are sort of a pioneer in the early stages and made it the success that it's been. How did you get started in hydrocarbon?
Well, it was kind of awkward how I got started. I was planning to be a mining engineer because I live in Minnesota, which is a big mining state for iron ore and other things. And my job with Pickens Mather Mining Company was set for my junior years, my summer in my junior year, and they canceled it at the last minute due to a steel strike. Really June with no summer job, and I really needed it for my tuition. Lo and behold, 2 days later, I got a letter from City Service Oil Company, and they were offering me a $600 scholarship, and in addition, a summer job. And I immediately accepted, and drove down to Bottlesville, Oklahoma, which is the production headquarters.
Oh, yes.
And I met some other executives, and then I started my first summer job in Wichita Falls, Texas. And it's been, from then on, I've been in the oil business.
It's just such an amazing story, and you can read about it in Ronald's book, Hydrocarbon Man. The book is available wherever books are sold, and the website, Ronald's website is ronaldgoodmannelson.com. His name, so you'll get information, can order the book there as well. What was the first job after earning your BS and MS degrees? What was the foundation for this career?
Well, I started in Albuquerque, New Mexico, with city service in the Four Corners area, which is in southwestern United States. And my first job was scouting, and that is sort of a job that's no longer in existence because it was outlawed by Congress in 1960. But I started in 1959 in May, and right after my master's. And at that time, I was engaged to my wife to be, Mary, and she took the train, the train out to Albuquerque, and I met her there, and we got married on the 3rd of July that year, 1959, in Albuquerque at a little Catholic church in the suburbs of Albuquerque. And my best man was Jimmy Abeda, who was a Pueblo Indian draftsman, and her bridesmaid was his wife, Verna. And so after she came out to Albuquerque, we had a dinner at one of the oldest restaurants in America, in Albuquerque, an old town. It's 413 years old.
Wow.
Coronado had lunch there 400 years before our meeting.
What an amazing story. And you'll read this and so much more in Ronald's book, Hydrocarbon Man, Memoirs of a 20th Century Oil Business Executive. Shortly after that, you went to Libya and you took the family there early on in the marriage. Talk about that and why you decided to take your family and the benefits for you and the family of having them there.
Well, I'll tell you, the year was 1968, and there was a lot of political assassinations going on. There was Robert F. Kennedy, Martin Luther King. A couple of years before that, John F. Kennedy had been assassinated. There were riots all around America because of the Vietnam War. And at the convention of the National Convention of the Democratic Party, there were more riots and so forth. And we decided that America was not a particularly safe place to raise a family. So we decided to go to the safe place in North Africa called Libya. Now, I had also read an article that said that American oil production was going to peak out in 1970, and after that would begin a decline. So I decided, why not go overseas where there's plenty of oil, and we'll start a new career overseas.
A very good decision on your part of thinking ahead, and what a delightful time for you. I'm saying this, what was the family's reaction living in Libya?
Well, I had to go first, and I was over there for about a month, and then they flew over, and it was just before Christmas of 1968, and they welcomed the chance because my wife had always wanted to live overseas, and so when they came over, they were ready for school. They went to the oil company school in Albuquerque. In
Libya.
In Libya. We were in Tripoli, Libya. And I would say they adjusted very well. They met local children and American children. My son met a little Arab boy about 10 years old who sold him a puppy for 10 piastres. That's 38 cents. And he brought it to our apartment, and it was kind of full of ticks and stuff, but we cleaned it up, and he ended up being a wonderful little dog.
What great memories. And they come to life in Ronald's book, Hydrocarbon Man. His website is ronaldgoodmannelson.com. What was your first big project regarding the reservoir simulation you did? And I think it's pronounced Defa oil field in Libya. What was your role with that?
Yes, that was my first job with Oasis Oil Company in Libya. And they had just discovered the Defa field, and the pressure on this field was falling. And everybody said, oh, don't worry, there'll be a natural water drive kick in to keep the pressure from falling too far. But I wasn't so sure. So I did a reservoir simulation with a computer where you break up the reservoir into little pieces and project into the future what happens to it. And I concluded that there was not going to be enough of a water drive to make any difference. And unless we injected about 250,000 barrels of water per day, the pressure would get down too low to produce. Well, there was skepticism about that, but Shell Oil Company, one of our owners of Oasis Oil, did some studies in The Hague, and they concluded the same thing I did. They supported my position. So we immediately went on a crash program to drill 8 injection wells and inject 240,000 barrels of water a day into this reservoir. And it immediately the pressure began to increase and the production increased with it. And I suddenly was a big hero.
And continued to be throughout your career. It's just amazing, a story like that and others that I mentioned in the beginning, and we'll talk about a pioneer and really by asking the questions, what if, and taking a different approach and being successful in doing that. You're there with your family in Libya, one of the reasons being, okay, this is safe here, things are in turmoil in the United States. And then September 1st, 1969, you got the coup by Colonel Gaddafi. What was that like going through that from a personal and a business standpoint?
Well, it was a shock the day of September 1st. I went to work that day and I noticed there were a bunch of cars parked in the places where they shouldn't have been. And I decided, what's going on here? And somebody said, coup d'etat. And I immediately turned around and went back home. And on the way, I saw my children waiting for the school bus. And I picked them up. I had a little Volkswagen. I picked them up. I said, there won't be any school today, kids. Come on home. And sure enough, we were in a week or two where we couldn't get out of the house more than 2 hours a day to go across the street and visit a relative or a friend or buy some groceries. And that was about it. And that lasted a week or two. And then we couldn't travel outside the country for 6 months. But other than that, everything else continued on. And fortunately, it was a bloodless coup. There was not an opposition to Gaddafi. And he ended up being a pretty good leader. And we were lucky that way.
What great stories. And for your children, I mean, in Minnesota, kids have snow days. Here, the kids can say that's nothing. I had a coup day. I didn't have to go to school for several days because of that. I mean, it's just the perspective there that you've had. It's just it's amazing. Our guest is Ronald Goodman Nelson. The book is Hydrocarbon Man. What was the first, what you would call, big promotion you had in the business?
Well, while I was in Libya, my boss was transferred to another part of the world. He went to Dubai, and I got promoted to his position. So I had 12 engineers and 2 secretaries reporting to me. And we did the planning and development of oil fields and injection systems and pipelines and so forth. And, you know, Oasis was a relatively small one-country oil company, and there were only 1,400 employees. 10% of us were expatriates, so only 140 people from other countries. And well, that was my first big promotion, and I went on from there.
Well, and you did, and I mentioned in the beginning the association you had in developing the tension leg platform. Talk about the project that led to that invention. What went into that?
Well, after I'd been in Libya for 4 or 5 years, we transferred to Holland and then to London with Conoco North Sea. And Conoco had been one of the owners of Oasis Oil Company in Libya, so I knew some of their executives. And they had just made a discovery of the Hutton Field in the North Sea when I arrived there. And the problem with that is that they were planning to put a conventional big platform, you know, the kind of like the great big bar stool to put all your drilling equipment on top
yes.
of.
Like on the cover of your book, I'm looking at that now and seeing that. So I know what you're talking about.
Yeah, and this was in 500 feet of water, but then they drilled a disappointing development well and decided, well, they couldn't afford to put that kind of a platform there because it would be too expensive and they wouldn't be commercial. So that project kind of lingered. They had another discovery or two to turn to. But I kept looking at that field and thinking there's got to be a way to produce this economically. And I came to the conclusion that a tension leg platform, which is like if you can imagine a cork with a string tied to the bottom and then pulled down a little bit below the surface of the water, it stays in place. Well, that's the way a tension leg platform is. And well, I promoted this idea, and there was a lot of skepticism for a couple of years. And nobody had ever done this anywhere in the world. And but after a couple of years, there were studies made, and we did some internal studies, and I finally got permission from Conoco to go ahead with it. And then we turned it over to our production services group in Houston, and they worked on it too. And by 1969, it was approved and went ahead into production. Into construction, I should say. It took a few years for it to be built, and it was finally on production in 1974. In the next year, 1975, Conoco won an award from the Offshore Technology Corporation for the most innovative project the previous year. And of course, with a big corporation, there's a lot of people involved, and the only people that get credit are the corporation itself.
Yes.
But anyway, that was a very successful project, and it made a big commercial, a field that otherwise would never have been developed.
Well, and you knew the background, the background of that and your role in that. And I can imagine as you're saying this, but the last thing you want to hear from an engineer is, we've never done it like that before. Is that's really not an excuse, is it?
I heard that a lot in my life.
I bet you have, and you haven't listened. You've heard it, but it hasn't absorbed. You haven't listened to it to the extent of following through with that. And then with Conoco, talk about in Norway in 1981, what you did there that led to the signing of the largest set of contracts in Conoco history.
Yes. When I went to Norway, I was manager of production there, manager of engineering in Stavanger, Norway. And we were busily developing the Statfjord field, which is a huge field that straddled the boundaries between Norway and the UK. In the middle of the North Sea at about 500 feet of water depth. And there was a lot of natural gas associated with the oil, which we stored for a while in one of the lower reservoirs. And then we made contact with 6 or 8 companies in Europe that distribute gas. They were gas companies that would buy this. And we invited them to Stavanger, and they all came on the 1st of March, 1981. And we signed contracts all day long because there were 3 companies that owned the gas, and there were 8 companies that were buying the gas, and we all had contracts with names all over. Yeah. My boss decided to go on a skiing trip that week because he didn't know anything about the gas. And so I was left there. And so I sent an email to, in those days it wasn't an email, it was a telex, to Stamford, Connecticut, to the president of Conoco, and got his permission for me to sign the contracts. So I signed them all.
What,
And,
amazing. This is in the book. There's so many great stories in the book, Hydrocarbon Man, by our guest on the program, Ronald Goodman Nelson. You'll find the book at Amazon, the usual places. His website, very simple, his name, ronaldgoodmannelson.com. Come to the United States then with Conoco, I believe, with 1982 through 84. What were your jobs when you got back to the States and working with Conoco?
well, I was moved back to Houston in 1982, and my job was to report to the president of the company. I was his technical advisor, and there was one other partner with me who was the uh, accounting advisor. So we were the two advisors, the president of Conoco, and we had to sell enough assets to help the DuPont family who had bought Conoco for $7.5 billion. We had to raise $4 billion to help pay down the debt because they couldn't sleep at night, the DuPont family. DuPont was owned by the family pretty much in those days. And so we did it. It took about a year and a half. And after that, the president retired, and I got moved to head of natural gas sales in the U.S. And that's how I spent the next couple of years.
That's amazing. And then you went on to the last 15 years, I think, of your career with, see if I get this right, DeGoldier and McNaughton. How did you spend the last 15 years? What was your job there?
Well, I was just one of the engineers at DeGoldier and McNaughton, which is a worldwide oil and gas consulting company, and had been around since 1936. And I traveled all over with clients that I...
This Week in America is online. You can visit our website, thisweekinamerica.us. Scott Pinkerton, associate producer of This Week in America. Jay Anderson, segment producer. Ben Watson, webmaster. Otto Bechet, director of engineering and TV production. This Week in America produced and is a trademark of Blue Funk Broadcasting, LLC. For information on all of our guests and to listen to this week's show, our website again at thisweekinamerica.us. And I'm Sean Bratton, executive producer of This Week in America.
Government and 2 or 3 oil companies over the premature cancellation of their lease. But we got it restored so that they could continue producing and developing on it. And another time in the royal courts in London, we settled a dispute between 2 large oil companies, Shell Oil and one other oil company. And those were just some of the projects that I was involved in.
That's amazing. And again, all of this and so much more in Ronald's book, Hydrocarbon Man, Memoirs of a 20th Century Oil Business Executive. Time is going by so quickly. Got a couple minutes left here at the end of the program. As you reflect back on your over 60 years in the industry, what advice do you have for young people that may be just getting started in the oil industry or thinking about it and afraid of, I wonder what the future is of the oil industry? What advice would you have for a young person?
Well, I'm not sure I'd recommend going into the oil industry anymore. It's past its peak. It's going to be a long decline. There's a lot of oil been discovered, and it'll be continued to be produced. But you can tell by the discoveries, when the discoveries stop happening, you know it won't be but 12 years when production will start declining. Well, that's already happened in the world. It happened in the U.S. in 1970, and it happened in the world in about 1915. So
you keep your finger on the pulse of what's happening in the industry, particularly fracking and U.S. oil production trends. Fracking was something we heard a lot about, not so much recently. Is fracking an answer to any of our problems?
It was a temporary boost to the oil industry.
Yeah, okay.
Because they were fracking in very tight shale, and the wells came on strong, but then they weakened very quickly. And I don't think it's the future. I think the best thing for a young person now is get a good education, keep the eyes peeled for opportunities like solar, wind, deep water in the United States. Also, just think of the fact that there's all sorts of shortages of water in the West. There's droughts and all sorts of things. That would be a wonderful future to help maybe convert seawater into fresh water with new technology.
Yes.
And that's where I would recommend.
We need to bring you out of retirement and get you back in the field and looking at some of these things. And remember, young people, don't let anybody ever say, we've never done that before. Those are not words you want to hear, and you don't want to live that. I'm going to take just a second here at the end, Ronald. What was it like going back and recalling all of these experiences and writing this book? How rewarding was this for you and the family to go back and relive this?
I've really enjoyed doing it, and I tell you, I recommend if people know they should record their life as best they can, even though they may think it's not so exciting. It still is a wonderful mark for their children and grandchildren to read how life was when they grew up. And I strongly recommend anybody that can do it to write about their past.
Well, you've done an excellent job. The book is Hydrocarbon Man, Memoirs of a 20th Century Oil Business Executive. Part of the subtitle, Experience the Age of Energy from an Oil Executive's View, one who has witnessed the trials of an industry fueling our lives. The author, our guest, Ronald Goodman Nelson. I thank King Pages Press for arranging our interview today. The author's marketing consultant, kingpagespress.com. Book is available wherever books are sold. Ronald's website is ronaldgoodmannelson.com. Ronald, it's been a pleasure. Hopefully we can do this again in your career. We could do a whole series of shows on this. I love what you've done, your enthusiasm, your passion, your outlook. Thank you for spending some time with us on the program.
Well, thank you, Rick, and I certainly enjoyed it.
It was a pleasure. Ronald Goodman Nelson, our guest on the program. The book is very simple, Hydrocarbon Man. You'll find it wherever books are sold, and get information and order it at Ronald's website, ronaldgoodmannelson.com. You're listening to This Week in America, and we're back on today's program after these messages.